massive announcement. This month I'm back to daily upload, so one video every day, 30 videos for the entirety of September. So come back and check every day. Oh goodness gracious. All lies debunked? In 22 minutes and 57 seconds when it comes to the Dark Ages. Hat off to you if you can manage that. Let's have a look. Link to the video and the channel in the description and pinned comment.
Historical misconceptions can be a dangerous thing. Misunderstanding how the world was in the past can influence how you behave in the present. And perhaps no period of history is more misunderstood than the Middle Ages. It's a popular historical misunderstanding today that the Middle Ages was a dark time of poverty, repressed science, and everyone just being miserable. This viewpoint can accurately be called the myth of the Dark Ages. It generally goes like this. Between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, Europe lived in a state of darkness. Everyone was poor, the church killed all scientists, and everything was just horrible.
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely is 100% correct in this section. I have to say, though, that even though in academia the term Dark Ages is now frowned upon and mostly not used due to the fact that, yes, it does give you the impression that, indeed, between the Renaissance and the fall of Rome, we've got a horrible period of obscurity. With that being said, it is epic. Like, it does sound epic. The Dark Ages, I like the sound of it. So for fantasy, absolutely use it. And for the medieval period, as far as I'm concerned, you can use it within gaming and role-playing games, who cares?
Then in the 1500s, the Renaissance and Reformation saved Europe from darkness and stupidity. Some versions go even further, believing it wasn't until the political changes of the 1700s that the Dark Ages ended. This myth was perhaps best described by Carl Sagan, the famous atheist who referred to European history between 500 and 1500 AD as a millennium gap, a poignant lost opportunity for the human species.
Yeah, of course, I disagree with his take 100%. I'm not sure if it's really a matter of being atheist or religious, or if, and I say this as a religious man, so I'm kind of breaking a lance in favor of this because we don't want to substitute a mischaracterization with another. I would say that he was wrong specifically in this case, and he misunderstood, perhaps out of arrogance or perhaps out of ignorance, of the reality of how advanced and ingenious and intelligent and resourceful medieval people were. Maybe was a bias on his, and possibly a bias on his side. I agree with that, but I'm just saying.
Sagan's 1980 book Cosmos included a ridiculous chart with a 1,000-year gap in scientific development between these years.
Ridiculous.
Okay. What's important to note right away is that the idea of the Dark Ages has been completely abandoned by real historians. There are countless works by academic sources about why the whole concept is wrong. Yet, the idea continues to influence popular imagination.
I mean, look at this. There's nothing dark, at least, about the way they're dressed. But that's another thing that he didn't mention, but I imagine he will, is that the other reason why we have this popular misconception of medieval being dark is the way it's visually represented. Because visual aids are important within the education system. And whether or not it's directly at school, which sometimes it was, unfortunately, or whether it's through indirect education or informal education, meaning oftentimes TV and movies and the like, which in theory they are entertainment, but people do believe that stuff. Yeah, we never see this. Like, look how colorful, and they're also all smiling in this case. Although I'll have to say, sometimes medieval illuminations, the guy smiling while he's being thrust in the head with a business end of an axe, that's kind of weird. Whatever. But in this case, they seem to be having a good time. No phones inside, enjoying the moment. But I have to say that look at the colors, reds and bright greens and blues. It's gorgeous. And we don't see this in the movies. It's dark, it's gray, it's gloomy, it's bleak, browns and faded blacks. There's no color, there's no joy, there is no dancing, nothing. And that is further away from the truth.
It's still common in the United States, where there's a tendency to dismiss European history as backwards or unimportant. This is despite the fact that America would not exist without Europe.
In this case, man, I think you kind of make... I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. If he's right and I'm wrong, fine. But I would say this... Is it? Do people say that in the United States? I mean, yeah, there are some people that hate Europe and Europeans, but oftentimes it's connected to a political message, which would mean it's factional at that point. I don't think people do think this. A lot of the times that I say that I have a channel focused on medieval history and Roman history and ancient Greece, everyone here in the US tells me, oh, that's so cool, that's awesome. People like it and they appear to be genuine. So I'm not sure if this is a mischaracterization once again.
The myth of the Dark Ages can also be found online. A recent example are popular YouTube videos like this one, with 2 million views. They claim no one today could survive.
Oh my gosh, medieval madness. Oh yeah, I debunked them a couple of times. Yeah, they're out of their mind.
In one day in medieval Europe. Yeah. The fact that our ancestors did survive and even thrived in this time tells you that videos like this aren't giving you the real story.
Absolutely.
So, what was the real situation in medieval Europe? Was it really a dark, horrible place for over 1,000 years? Well, no. And this video will explain why. Strap in, because on this video on PaxTube, I'll be shining light on the real story of the so-called Dark Ages. Let's begin by talking about how the Middle Ages began. The Middle Ages covered a 1,000-year span that
so now he's going to go into the history of how it began. That's fine. Also, the number of years. I'm going to skip around a little bit because I always want to encourage people to go and watch the video. Today we're having a little bit of a demo, if you will. But what I wanted to show this is the following. 1,000 years depends how you look at it. And in fact, even the nomenclature, Dark Ages, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the video. Up to this point, it's quite solid and I appreciate it. But I do want to say, so sometimes people, when they say the Dark Ages, they mean the entirety of the Middle Ages. And other times when you say Dark Ages, they only mean the early medieval period, up until it becomes the High Middle Ages, and then they use High Middle Ages. So it kind of depends. Even when in use, up to like in the 80s was still used, absolutely, I think, for what I remember. How much of a span of time that is depends. Still, is it 1,000 years? It depends. It can be 1,000 years or it can be 500 years. I'm the guy who says 1,000 years. From 500 to 1,500 is how I say that's medieval, and then I divide it into early Middle Ages, High Middle Ages, and late Middle Ages, or Dark Ages if I'm playing a video game. But in general, that's the for the earlier part. But yeah, sure. So he's going to go into the history, great. And let's see when he has a few sections. Let's see what he says about churches and monasteries. I liked.
Then there was the church. One can't understand the Middle Ages without understanding the role that monasteries played in the development of society.
Absolutely.
The church gradually rose in power and influence throughout the early Middle Ages. This culminated in the Pope officially getting his own state in 756, becoming known as the Papal States. Under this government, the Pope directly controlled Rome and its surrounding territories. With this position of power, the papacy could now exert great influence on the entire European Church. And far from repressing knowledge, they got hard at work preserving and spreading it. Monastery networks developed across the continent, where devout men gathered to study, interpret, and spread works of Christian knowledge.
Not to mention all the copying. Like a lot of this stuff that we have is thanks to monks painstakingly writing and copying word by word, letter by letter, sometimes with mistakes, and oftentimes I think there is a statistical percentage of mistakes whenever something is copied by hand. I looked into it, I don't remember it now exactly, but it's been calculated. But it's very low when they are really good copyists. And yeah, a lot of the literature we have, sometimes we don't have the original anymore, we only have the copy. Thank God we still have the copy in that situation. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.
People came to these monasteries to live Christian lives of work, self-sacrifice, and strict religious observance. Monasteries would end up serving many valuable functions. Their primary goal was religious. They were a place for the most devoted Christians to come and live a life of dedication to God. Many monks took vows of poverty and spent their time doing missionary activities.
Particularly Franciscans. The vows change, of course, between orders. Also, let's not forget, monasteries made ale and beer. Did you forget that?
The rule of Saint Benedict, one of the early codes for monastic life, charged followers with reading holy writings every day. Monks worked with biblical texts and developed religious histories and biographies. These monks, along with priests and nuns, educated Christians across Europe in the principles of the faith. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux would later write, "There are those who seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge. That is curiosity. There are those who seek knowledge to be known by others. That is vanity. And then there are those who seek knowledge in order to serve. That is love."
That is actually a beautiful, beautiful quote. So thank you, Pax, if I can call you Pax for, I don't know your name, for finding this. I really, really like it. And it's true, even to this day, I would say. Three different ways by which people approach or seek the accumulation of knowledge. Personally, I would say number one and number three are fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Curiosity is a good thing. Number two.
To seek knowledge in order to serve. That is love. Monasteries also provided other valuable assets to the surrounding community. Science and mathematics were studied there. The knowledge of the Greeks and Romans was preserved and promoted.
Absolutely.
New students learned grammar, rhetoric, and logic. When they mastered these, it was common to move on to arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy.
Yeah, in fact, in a lot of like early versions of institutions for higher educations do begin in the Middle Ages, like Oxford University, for instance. There are a few others. And so imagine that. How can it be the Dark Ages if they literally made universities? Am I right?
Books were prized as treasures. If a monastic community came under attack, monks would take manuscripts into hiding in the forest or other remote areas until the danger passed. Monastic education eventually expanded to laymen, and this would develop into the medieval university system.
There he is.
The historian Melissa Snell wrote that modern scholars will forever be in debt of the monastics. It's a shame that many modern academics do not recognize this debt.
You know, good channel up to this point. I really like the points that he's making. Let me have a look at, this is the most replayed? Oh, this is the most replayed, this section here. Let's see what he shares.
First at mining. They explored a semblance of order in the Mediterranean. At the same time, the Holy Roman Empire, England, and France emerged as important kingdoms. Domestic manufacturing of goods grew. Germans at this time became experts at mining. They exported iron, copper, and tin to the rest of Europe. Other European states exported goods like linen, cotton, wool, and salt. And that wasn't all. Silk and porcelain from China, gold from Japan, and ivory from Africa became highly in-demand goods. Traveling trade fairs became popular, and they gave people greater access to goods than they'd usually find in their local market. Fairs boomed in Western Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries. The development of currency and loans further boosted economic development. Investors could now have a stake in the international economy. Guilds were also established across Europe that kept up the standards of manufacturing professions.
That is one thing as well. Whenever we look at, for instance, medieval European armor and the way it was built, it did have to do with guilds. And so basically you would not, because sometimes we imagine, particularly if you play a game, oftentimes we imagine, okay, there is one single smith and he makes the stuff himself, maybe he has one or two assistants, and then you can choose the helmets, the swords. And I mean, yeah, sometimes, sure, but in the medieval period, particularly when you look at the guild labor in, for instance, the Milanese sector, it's impressive. Like, even to make a freaking sword, you would have a section of the guild that has to do with people that made the hilt, and then another section, a completely different set of people were making the blade. Like, sometimes it was that well organized in the way, as he says correctly, minimum standards. And that's the same with armor. It wasn't uncommon to have, sometimes you would have your entire set of armor as a nobleman being developed by a single armorer or armoring enterprise, but other times you could have, like we do today, like in my case, you could have your breastplate, backplate, and fold made by one armorer, and then you could have the helmet made by someone else. That's something that does happen sometimes, and that's how I have my own sets of armor usually developed. So yeah, intercity and even international commerce was a thing. Should we say inter-realm? I don't know.
Altogether, these holidays added up to dozens of days per year where people didn't have to work. These days, people would get a break from work required to work. There were big celebrations like Easter days they wanted to. While they did have to live much more physically demanding lives than a modern person, they weren't worked as slaves either. The average medieval worker had many holidays and feast days where they weren't required to work. There were big celebrations like Easter, Christmas, and the Epiphany. These didn't last just one day, but multiple days. The Christmas feast, for example, lasted 12 days. On saint feast days, people would get a break from work to attend Mass, feast, and make offerings to the saints being honored. The veneration of saints was a central aspect of Christianity in the Middle Ages.
Man, look at those red and blues in the stained glass. It's absolutely gorgeous. Good research up to this point. Good research, I have to admit. Good channel.
Their relics were displayed in churches and carried in processions. Altogether, these holidays added up to dozens of days per year where people didn't have to work for their Lord. Now, don't get it wrong. Working hard remained a necessary part of medieval life. Taking care of your animals and farm was serious business.
Yeah.
Neglecting your duties could mean famine and starvation in the community. Law and order was thus strict. People at this time didn't really have humor for criminals and ne'er-do-wells. Messing with someone's animals, for example, was seen as attempted murder on their entire family. If authorities could get their hands on criminals, punishment was swift and severe. Execution of brigands and murderers was the norm. One has to ask here, was law and order in the Middle Ages too strict, or is law and order in modern liberal societies too lenient? When you see rapists in the US today getting minor sentences, one has to wonder.
I think it would be probably an in-between. Yeah, I agree that, as you say, a rapist should not get a minor sentence. Absolutely. Go like for full penalty. Never going to leave that prison ever again, if you ask me. But with that being said, of course, sometimes if you look at the like quartering and all that kind of stuff in the Middle Ages, it's, yeah, I mean, I think we need an in-between. I think we need a healthy in-between. At least that's my own personal opinion. Let's see why he thinks these myths exist.
To understand the Dark Ages myth, we need to understand why it exists. The Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, "To destroy a people, you must first sever their roots." I believe this is what the Dark Age myth seeks to do. For the people who spread it, it's not an honest misunderstanding, but a deliberate attack on European and Catholic history. If someone can convince the younger generations that their ancestors were just backwards fools, they can convince them to abandon their heritage. They can manipulate them into following their way of thinking.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so in some instances, I agree with him. There are absolutely some elements in today's society that are trying to do this. And to these people, I say, get lost. With that being said, I don't think it's always the case. I do think that there are genuinely elements that just do it out of ignorance. They don't know. They don't know what they don't know. And so I would say that in some instances it is true, absolutely, but in other instances it's not. Anyways, thank you, PaxTube. Appreciate the video. And guys, check it out. Thank you for watching.